So for today's Ask Me Anything session, we're chatting to CEO of Goterra, Olympia Yarger. So Olympia, thank you for joining us. We're very excited to hear all about Goterra, and I'll be handing over to you now.
So Goterra is waste management infrastructure, which sounds like the most unsexy thing you can do, but that's not true. It is the absolute coolest tech you can be working on currently, particularly if you are interested in complex problem solving, but also contributing meaningfully to delivering on climate impact. And so for us, we have this really unique opportunity to do difficult things, but do them in a way that leverages like true impact back into the world that we're all going to have to live in the next couple of decades. So Goterra started in my garage, as all good startups do, and it was at the beginning it was just going to be, can I make protein for livestock production with insects? And yes, you can, and there are lots of companies in the world that do that. But what's different about what Goterra does is that we realize that the problem both in farming systems and in waste management are these. We have high transport costs, which is the transportation of heavy stuff across the world and across regions. Landfill is expensive and becoming more expensive because we're running out of space. Similarly, on the ag side, if instead of landfill, if you replace it with intensive farm, once you've finished dragging in expensive feed around, you are sending it to this really huge capital intensive farm that has lots of competing CapEx and OpEx requirements, and it's not logistically opportunistic anymore. So the places where you can have big intensive farms are getting further and further from the places where those that food ends up. So you don't see poultry farms on the outskirts of Sydney anymore, because now we have cities and towns on the outskirts of Sydney. There's very few alternatives for managing food waste. And similarly, there's very few alternatives for improving or increasing our protein production, and the huge environmental impact. So both for waste management and protein production, the cost to the environment of both of those things is significant. And so really when we looked at how do we turn insects into protein, we realized that yes, food waste is a problem, but when you're making insects, it's just their feed. And then similarly, when you're using insects to manage food waste, if you create a huge factory to manage that waste, then you've just replicated the existing problem with landfill, which is it's a centralized, capital intensive hole in the ground that will cost lots of money to get waste to it and lots of money to run it. So the opportunities for us were, how do we disrupt this industry without changing it? And that's a really important thing, right? Because you don't want to create a change that makes people uncomfortable. You want to shake up how things are done, but most people and most communities don't want to have to spend a lot of energy or time worrying about where their food waste goes to. They want it to just go away. So we looked at that problem and we created this solution. So we decided that because they were small and transportable, we would create modular infrastructure that delivered a biological service. So like any good startup, we turned that into an acronym, and that's the product we make. We make mibs. Mibs are autonomous robotic insect farms that deliver a fee for service. So we have mibs that manage waste. We have mibs that create flies to make more insects. We have mibs to create a protein for human consumption. For us, it's about decentralizing the opportunity and creating a logistically opportunistic infrastructure play so that you can put it wherever you need. So that means is that organic waste management that can be as close to the source as possible or reasonable. They can be stood alone and stacked to create high volume, or they can be moved into different ways and applied in different directions so that you've got this solution that's agile. So instead of the more conventional infrastructure play, which is like build it and they'll come. You can start small, generate revenue, grow as you grow that sales pipeline. And then you're using insects. So when we talk about circular economy, what we're saying is we want to create as many opportunities for valorisation along a supply chain as possible. To do that, we need infrastructure. The world as we know it needs infrastructure to deliver on circular economy principles and practice. It will not be a solution solved by SaaS platforms alone. And so when you think about the circular economy today, sometimes things aren't circular, but in, for example, food waste, you can see right now food waste is collected. Food waste will go to, say, an anaerobic digester, or which then makes electricity, and then the sludge from the anaerobic digester is turned into compost. So there you've got 1, 2, 3 moments of valorisation, and the chain goes around. But with us, you can go a few more steps, and that's what circular economy is always about, is continuing to refine the opportunity of no waste. So you could use an anaerobic digester and then add our process, which creates protein and creates a better frass, and then send those two things out into the world to make more livestock feed. And that then has created electricity. It's created now 2 offtake valorizations. We need to continue to figure out better ways to create infrastructure that deliver on these opportunities so that we can create more circularity to the supply chains as we move forward. Insects are super easy to do that with because they're fast growing, fast evolution, and they have such a wide variety of application. So what does that look like when we think about it in the world? So today, all waste, irrespective of where it's coming from or what kind it is, has to travel to central location to be managed. It doesn't matter if that's a regional town or a big city, but one way or the other, the distance is going to be anywhere between 2 kilometres and 100 kilometres. But in metro, it's starting to be upwards of 50 to 100 kilometres. And similarly, in some regional communities that aren't considered big enough for their own infrastructure, that waste is being transported upwards of 200 to 300 kilometres. That decentralisation of waste management is removing industry opportunity from our regions and creating extensively high capex cost to a small constituent of ratepayers. With our kind of infrastructure, we can adapt to the scenarios and problems. So high volume wholesale clients, like a factory that produces upwards of 2 tonnes of waste a day, could have an on-site unit that stands alone and manages waste as an asset right at the source. Or you can deploy smaller stacks of our units so that you can create waste transit centre opportunity where small volumes are collected, brought back to a central location and managed. And that then has solved a problem for both sides of the logistics challenge in the most opportunistic way for each of those clients. Our goal is to continue to make these systems so adaptable that the data interaction with our clients, which we're already starting to see, will then in turn help reduce the amount of waste going into them, which, for a startup, that's extraordinary that we would want to reduce the volume of waste coming into our system. But the more data we can return to our customers, the more money they can save. And so all that is additional links to the chain. I know this was only supposed to be a 10-minute little intro. I reckon we would probably be close to having a bit more of a chat about what is a maggot robot in real time, and go from there.
Awesome. You've sold me, Olympia. I'll be sending you my CV after this.
That's awesome.
So we've got a few questions already coming through in the Q&A. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was great to get an overview of what you do. Just a reminder that to those asking questions, if you want to ask, use the Q&A function in Zoom and not the chat function, which is a mistake that I make continuously. You can ask my colleagues, they can attest to that. It's very, very annoying. So the Q&A function also allows you to upvote any questions that have already been asked so that we can prioritize the most popular ones. Now, seeing as this discussion is part of a Careers Expo, let me start by asking you, on behalf of all other aspiring CEOs, you mentioned that you started the company in your garage. What actually led you there, and what was your background, Olympia?
So I came from ag. I was just trying to find a way to create a protein so that I could farm at a small scale. Feed is 70% of all agricultural costs. And so if I could reduce the cost of feed, I could create a thing. And that's where I realized that the supply chain was exactly the same, whether we were looking at insects or poultry. You're going to have to transport this food waste. And so, of course, the first thing was like, can I make maggots grow in a bucket? Which is harder than it looks, which was frustrating. And then from once I got maggots to grow in a bucket, it was about, what does this look like commercially? How do you know, and so this is like concentric circles of evolution where you sort of make a leap forward, and then you sort of, then once you've got here, that becomes new normal. And so then you go backwards a little bit because you're like, oh, we know everything. And then something will break or something will go wrong, or maggots will end up on the ceiling. And then you go, oh, here's some more learning, and you start again. And so, yeah, the evolution of like, I have maggots in a bucket and that's a thing and that's my tech, to, oh no, my bad, my real tech is actually this bucket that's an IoT-driven autonomous robot. That's actually important. Growing maggots is not really as important. And so it's just that evolution of things. From the staffing side, we started, I have a real, like, it's a difficult thing, staff, because you're asking them to do an immeasurably difficult thing. So you're committed to what's happening because you've thought it up, it's your baby. You now have to bring people on that journey with you, and you have to recognize what kind of leader you are when that's happening. So I am super inspirational. I can inspire people to like charge over the mountain with me. But that's exhausting. You want to charge one time. Nobody wants to charge over a mountain 17 times. And so I had to learn that it wasn't enough to be inspirational. You had to sort of bring it back and also develop capability to be consistent and capability to set expectations, because it's not enough to just turn up every morning and go to the hills, you know, because everyone's like, oh, I'm tired. So, you know, so like you have to adapt your management style for this environment because it's exhausting. Additionally, you know, I'm very driven. I work a lot. I love to work. Work feels like a privilege to me. And so you can sometimes forget that that's not true for other people. They can be really passionate about their job, but they don't want to do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, as extraordinary as you find that. And so learning how to understand those things and manage them in conjunction with the incredible pressure to succeed is difficult. And why some startups, including ours, can, you know, you can have bumps along the way where you're just like, oh, I broke a person, you know, and that relationship didn't end up well, or, oh, somebody who we really loved just doesn't like working here because this is hard. And you have to sort of just be really conscious of how you're managing those things and try to do better each time you have that set of learning. We tried to keep that in mind. We started with mostly interns out of forensic science. For me, forensic scientists are a compelling group of scientists to hire from because of how they're taught, the methodology around their science inquiry. They're taught to understand a story from its beginning to its end, what made this happen and what contributed to it and what are the markers. They aren't a hyper-focused methodology on like a little grain of sand. They're like all of the connection. And that was really useful in learning about process. And so we had a bunch of interns that were like, I just want more experience. And I'm like, I need people to work for free. And they're like, yay. And so after the raise, we hired our first, all of those interns ended up with jobs as soon as we raised our money. And we went from there.
It sounds like sorry. I was just going to say, it sounds like, when you were looking for your interns as well, they needed to have that curiosity, and that was part of the process as well. I just wanted to touch on, before you said when working in this kind of environment, what kind of environment is that? Because, we hear a lot that startups are, high pressure and a lot of peaks and troughs. And so it'd be really interesting if you could just paint a picture of what it's like to work at Goterra and to work in such a fast scaling startup.
Yeah, so I've got a great example. We've got working functional commercial tech, and our tech is out in the world doing its job, and sometimes it breaks. And what you have to remember is, for us, we are building a piece of machinery, we are driving it with software, and we're throwing a biological component inside of it. And that biological component changes the environment. So the machine can manage its environment all day long, and then the maggots change and challenge that environment. So if it's 40 degrees outside, the machine will try to cool itself down, but the maggots will be trying to keep themselves hot. And so you've got to figure out how to understand that symbiosis and create a symbiosis synthetically. When you're doing that and you get it right with the machine, and then you add the maggots and it doesn't work, it can be inherently, like your first reaction is like, take the maggots out. It's like, oh, but it's got to have them in there. And the tech team is like, just get them out and we'll solve it. And it was working before the maggots. And I'm like, well, it wasn't working then, because the maggot, like it isn't, it's like saying the toast is really good unless you put toast in it, and then it's not good. And so, well, then it's not a toaster, is it? It's just this sort of like weird warming device. And so like you can find yourself you work so hard to get something to work, that when it doesn't work under the pressure that you have to add, you can find yourself inadvertently trying to remove it and saying, oh, well, it just take that bit away and then it won't be hard. Let's not manage difficult food waste because it won't have anything in it and then it'll be easier. And it's like, but that's not the job. The job is to manage the difficult stuff. And so particularly for engineers and scientists who are precision-driven people who want things to be accurate, want things to, like, they spend a lot of energy and a lot of their effort and passion into making things right, that can feel so disconcerting and unsettling that it doesn't matter how much you try, you can't fix it. The way you have to flip your mindset is to remind yourself that if it was easy, it would have already been done. Secondly, it is absolutely okay for this to not work. Our job is not to focus on that. It is just to sort of go back and go, what did we miss? How do we figure it out? What's enough of a milestone to say it's cool? And then just to continue to like keep the good spirits. And like, again, it's really, really difficult when something doesn't work over and over again for you to go, have a great day, everyone. Like, because you're just like, I hate this. This is dumb. And so that's the environment, is constantly feeling challenged, both personally, both in your professional capability, and then as a member of a team who has a desire to do something right, to hit an obstacle that can feel insurmountable, super challenging to be okay in all of that, and to stay, oh, it's okay, we're learning from the difficulty and it's fine. We're dealing with big 7-ton robots. When things break, it's not a Fitbit. You're not like, let me just quickly solder that back together. No, you're like, get the forklift. We're going to have to unbolt 7,000 bolts and like weld this bloody thing back together. And meanwhile, the production team will have to be sweeping up maggots off the ceiling. Like, these are not like a small spark and things have gone wrong. This is like catastrophic, fuck my life type stuff, like that's where we're at. So yeah.
Imagine when you get it right, it feels just so good.
Yeah, but the irony of that, and typical of Australian startups, is that we celebrate for a millionth of a second. We're like, yay, next. right? You don't get to the shore and go, wow, like butt slap, high five, everyone knocking themselves out. You're like, oh, cool, we did it. What's next on the sprint? Like, and so you're never getting enough congratulatory cheerleading because your eye is still very far in the horizon.
Yeah.
And again, as a startup founder, that's something you have to manage. You have to be better at reminding the team that they had some wins this year or this month or this minute, because they will continue to just stare at the next problem and the next problem.
Especially in a year like this year. Has your business been greatly impacted by COVID or?
Yeah, climate change is real. Let's all make a deal that we're going to be belligerently rude to everybody who suggests otherwise. We were having the egg production of our lives in November, and then we ended up with the fires November, December, January, February. Canberra had an AQI, Air Quality Index, of 2,700 for January and February, which affected egg production. We then went straight into a hailstorm that ruined the roofs of both of our warehouses and damaged a lot of robotic equipment. And then we went into flooding, which flooded both of our warehouses. And then we closed around and COVID happened. And so, like, yes, it's been super difficult, and not for the same reason other companies have. Like, we are essential services. People still waste food. We were very fortunate, but in different ways that was very demoralizing and caused a lot of challenges. So, yeah.
Yeah. And what's been kind of the biggest learning through that as a leader for you?
I think it's that conversation around, how do you keep a team together? How do you make, when you're yourself stressed and scared and worried and feeling like a failure, and your imposter syndrome's like kicking goals all day long. Like, how do you stand in front of your team and go, we've got this? Like, how are you going to keep going when they need you to? How are you going to know when you shouldn't be like that? And how are you going to be confident enough to remove the people who don't belong in your team and need to go so that your team can continue to do well? Like, there's a lot of moving parts. It's hard.
There's a big learnings in a very short time. I feel like I'm hogging all the questions, so I'm going to go to some of we've got some in the Q&A here. So here we go. On the internship program, do you take anyone for your internship program?
Yep.
What kind of, apart from forensic scientists, are there any other kind of disciplines that you look for? I mean, that might be good just to chat about just broadly in your team as well as as part of the internship program.
Yeah, so like, I think it's important to remember that you aren't going to know who you're hiring, particularly when you're looking at a job that's super difficult. So it's like, we hire across trade and engineering and science, and then we hire at entry level. And then it's like, the question is always like, who works at a maggot farm? Like, who are those people? And how do you find that expertise? And then how do you apply it to what you need? So from the intern perspective, we're just looking for engaged, creative, inspired human beings who want a trade of equal value. And that's important, because we're going to give you everything we've got, and we're going to give you an immersive experience to let you understand what this looks like. We're going to give you opportunities to work on things for real. It's not a go get a coffee job. But by the same token, we want you to show up like it's not a go get a coffee job. We want you to care. We want you to be participatory. We want to hear your feedback. We want you to want to do a trial. If you're on the insect side, we want you to fiddle with something on a breadboard. We want you to build a spreadsheet if you want to be in the admin side. And so it's about that sort of engagement and commitment. I think if you wanted to box it up, we're looking for people who come from a background of process and design engineering, electrical and mechanical engineering. We also, and software. And then of course, from the trade side. If we've got any TAFE people on the call, TAFE's great. So we are looking for, technicians, electricians, fitters, machinists. These are all, by and large, a lot of engineers don't actually have the capability to build the stuff they design. And so we rely strongly on our trade skill people to deliver outcomes. And then on the biological side, we're looking for forensic scientists, biotechnicians, super interested in any entomologists. It's a bit of a dying trade, and data analyst type people. And then in the office side, strategic development, logistics, sustainability, HR, process and direction type stuff. Like there's like,
yeah.
Yeah. So.
And is that kind of within your own team as well, not just interns? How do you see that growing? Like all these roles you've just mentioned, are those roles that you might be hiring for in the next 12 months? I know you guys recently raised.
Yeah, so I see the question on how much we've raised so far. And so we raised friends and family round of about 70,000, which is some angel investment. Then we raised a $1.2 million angel round. And then we raised an $8 million Series A. And then, I know, what's up? And then you've got, for us now, we're hiring currently junior hardware engineer or entry-level hardware engineer. We're hiring electricians. We're hiring a senior, like product manager, project manager engineer, electrical engineer. And then on the biotech side, we've got 2 biotech tech positions. And so, the team's just going to continue to grow. We're moving into other regions next year. So we'll be starting plants in 2 other states. And so there's some opportunities to move around. Because we are vertically integrated, most of the stuff that we do is here in Canberra, which is the best because Canberra is way cooler than Melbourne or Sydney. I don't care what anyone tells you. We have better coffee. It's true. We have better access to the beach and the mountains, and we have no traffic. And also you can afford to live in something other than a mailbox.
I'm actually not from Sydney, so they do not have my coffee here.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because a lot of people are like, oh, I couldn't leave Sydney. And I'm like, why don't you like Sydney? And they're like, traffic and the cost. And I'm like, we have neither of those things. So, so we do, particularly in the tech roles, you have to be here. It's not a remote environment because we build things that have to integrate. And so being virtual, if you're trying to build a maggot robot, it's not a great fit. But yeah.
So would people, I've heard a lot that it's sometimes hard to find people with the right skills, especially highly technical skills. Have you found that people have had to relocate to join your team?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unapologetic about it. And I think, like, here's the thing, right? Like, it depends on what you want to do. So if you have a specific career goal in mind, then I would suggest that you do not care about where you are.
Mm-hmm.
You can care about where you are after. And I'm talking to entry-level people at this stage or people who are going through a career change, right? So if you're changing a career or you're starting your career, you go where the job is. Like, you can want to live in New York, you can want to live in San Fran, you can want to live in Sydney. Those things are great. But if you have a true career goal, creating a geographical fence around that career goal is just not advantageous. So if I could give anyone the single best piece of advice is keep your geographical location aspirational and take the jobs as you find them. Don't say no to a great job in Emerald, Queensland, where one of the coolest ag tech robotic companies in the world is working, because you don't want to live in Emerald. 2 years of your life in Emerald at a company like that will get you back to Sydney in the kind of company you want. And not for nothing, you've got less competition because you're going when very few other people want to go. So you get to pick really great opportunities. We don't apologise for asking people to come to Canberra. It's where we are, and it's where we're doing what we do. And I think that shouldn't be a hardship, to be fair.
I got to say, personally, I love Canberra, so you still have me sold on that. We have another question. It's actually two questions. Is it sustainable for this industry to be private versus public, say government supported? And who are Australian or international competitors in this field?
Yeah, so it depends on how you look at the industry. So if you're looking at it from a waste management perspective, our competitors are composters, anaerobic digesters, and landfill. And so the competition, and of course, some of your sort of waste to disposal, like an orca or a Gaia, which sort of like basically churns up the food waste into a slurry and sends it to sewer. But sewer is just a different kind of landfill. And so those are our competitors. And when you consider the fact that two of those options are actually just disposal, not recycling, for us, it's like, okay, we actually are a legitimate opportunity here. The third thing is that our competitors cannot decentralize in the same way that we can. So it's much harder for anaerobic digesters have to be where high volumes of waste can be collected, and they're not agnostic. So they have to have certain blends of food wastes to be effective. So that is sort of where we sit in the competitor profile. On the flip side, in the bug conversation, there's lots of competitors for insect farming. There's quite a few here in Australia that are doing really well, and there's definitely a lot overseas, some that have raised over $100 million in their last rounds, but none of them are looking at the infrastructure the same way as we are, which is to deploy insects as a fee-for-service model. And I think that's what's really interesting, right? Is like our competitors will maybe make insect protein better than us. Okay, like that's a commodity. I don't really mind if their commodity is a better quality commodity than mine, because on the front end, we've already done some decent revenue raising with the fee-for-service waste model. So yeah, as far as sustainable for the industry to be private, that's a super interesting question. I don't believe, like, government infrastructure is important, and I don't like the privatization of government infrastructure. I think there are some things that just need to be owned by the populace and need to be run agnostically for the good of all. And waste management services are one of those things. But the delivery of that service has been privatized for a really long time. So governments own the landfill, but they pay private companies to run and manage those landfills. And so I think we fit fairly neatly into the existing model of waste management service that can be owned by the government and administered on behalf of the government for the people, but run by a private company. So I hope that answers that question.
In my previous role, my colleagues were responsible for delivering the National Food Waste Strategy.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious to hear from you how you think we're going here in Australia at managing our food waste. Are you seeing a lot of progress?
No.
I mean, just generally?
No, we're like a pretty gross example of an entitled rich country. And I say that with all the love in my heart. We are, like, I love Australia deeply, but we are so oblivious to how wealthy we are and how privileged we are and how lucky we are. And that translates into our waste. Our waste was too dirty to be managed. Like that, China just was like, you guys are so bad at recycling that we refuse to take it. Like, that's a level of apathy that is like transitionally not going to improve just because we've decided to hit some waste targets. Those things are culturally embedded in how we see waste and how we engage with our waste. What we do see is that over time, our clients that engage with our systems are better, and they have data they've never had access to before, which improves how much they purchase, how they manage their back-end kitchens, how much they put on their clients' plates. All of those things are improving from engagement with businesses like ours and any other business that's tracking real-time the cost of food waste. We don't have great data on it, so it's really hard to create a compelling financial case around food waste, because we're like, we think it's like this many tons-ish. And then you start managing it and you're like, oh, it's like 4 times that. That's incredible, you know. So I think we're about a year off having meaningful data that can be used as case studies to be like, we are outside our minds on how much we're wasting and we need to fix it. But yeah, like we're not even like the targets are the first great step, but we're not even, I don't think we're even on the train yet on that one, frankly.
I think we're even having trouble as a country defining what food waste is.
Yeah, and that's fair in a way, right? Because there's wasted and waste. And those two things are actually wholly different. Wasted food is just something that suffered a logistics or a supply chain or an overproduction problem. And then there's waste, off, failed, whatever. And some of that, you know, in the logistics supply chain can be saved if we have some better tech. And then there's downstream, like I don't eat my crusts. I don't like this apple core, whatever. And that's actual waste. But yeah, right now we're just like, nah, we buy 6 lettuce heads, we eat 2, throw the rest away. It's no big deal. Yeah. And I think those things need to change.
You guys are playing such an important role in that cultural shift that you were talking about, and actually getting people to see value in their waste.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Extraordinary.
Let's see, we've got a few more questions here. So I think you kind of touched on it, but it would be good to know what's on the cards for Goterra in 2021. And maybe there's also another question around your dream for Goterra in 15 years. So what's the short term and the long term vision?
Oh, it's both the same. More maggots, more money. Like that, like it's just about growth for us. So in the first round, the job was, you know, I went out to the investors and I was like, hey, I've drawn this thing, and I think if we take this drawing and I've made this shelf that works, and if you give me $1.2 million, we're going to take this shelf design, we're going to put it inside a shipping container and make a commercial robot that can manage waste with insects. And we got the 1.2 and we did that. And then the next round was like, okay, we built this robot and it did its job, but we think if you give us $8 million, we can make like 14 of these things and like send them out into the world and learn how to do that well. And then follow this model of like, execute, accelerate, and scale. And if you do that in increments, so every month, every quarter, every year, you're thinking about what are we executing on today, what needs to be accelerated today, and what needs to scale today. And that changes and shifts as you get better at things, right? So right now we're in that $8 million stage. And so it is about executing. So building more maggot robots, building a bigger colony, building a bigger client funnel, accelerating that. So like do it faster and do it better than you were doing it before, and then scaling it, do it in another place, prove that you can do it away from home. And then from there you go, okay, well now we know we can deploy them. Where else can we send them? So we will be in Asia next year. That's the goal. And we will continue the slow and purposeful march of maggot robots across the world until we've achieved maggot robot dominance. And yeah, my vision is that you will see this kind of infrastructure in precincts and in regional towns, and that they're delivering benefit, but not just for me or for Goterra, but for those communities. So where small towns can have a regional waste collector that can use our infrastructure to add another revenue stream to his waste collection because he can now do organics. Or we can create a little small town regional brand of dog food or chicken feed or something else, so that people can stay in these communities and build industry and those sorts of things. And that's a global vision, not just an Australian one. So yeah.
That's a pretty impactful vision.
I'm
conscious of time, so I just want to ask you one last question on behalf of all the people that are watching. What's your number one tip for someone applying for a job at Goterra, and I'm not asking on behalf of myself, I promise. It's just for anyone applying for a job.
Number one, well, I'll give you three. Okay. You must always follow the directions of the job. So if it tells you on Seek to apply to Laura, you need to send Laura an email. I think for us, culture fit trumps pretty much anything. We obviously skill set's important, but like can-do attitude, willing to make something work, willing to sacrifice or adapt to stuff. And so anything that you can sort of talk about that sort of says, hey, look, I want this experience. I'm going to come from another state, or I'm going to come from another location. And I don't care about that because I see what I want to learn. Identifying those things is really, really compelling. So like we've had some interns that have written to me personally on LinkedIn and just been like, I love what you do. I want to be here in my career. Would it be okay if I came and this is what I'd like to learn? And that's really interesting because we can go, oh, hey, we can totally help with that. Or, hey, we probably can't help too much with this bit, but like we'd be maybe able to help with this. Is that close enough? And those sorts of things, I think, give us a personal connection that people sometimes don't interject in their applications. Like normally like cover letter, resume, and then you worry about it for 5 days. Like tell us what you're hoping for. Talk about what you want to do. And it doesn't need to say, hey, I'm going to stay at Goterra till I'm 90. Like if you want to go off and do something else, but you think we'd be a good stepping stone, like say that. That's really interesting to us. So yeah.
Thanks, Olympia. That's duly noted. So thanks so much for your time and telling us all about Goterra's journey and for your very generous advice. Those out there considering a career in deep tech, we really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. It's really good. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Let us know if you have any questions outside of this one, and wish you all the best. Happy Christmas and New Year.
Thanks, Olympia. And to everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. This is only week 3 of Emerge. It goes for another 2 weeks. We've got 4 more Ask Me Anything sessions like this one coming up over the next couple of weeks. So make sure you register. It's super easy to do with the link that my colleague just posted. And also check out our job board on the cicadainnovations.com website. A lot of these companies that you're hearing from today are hiring, so you can go check out all the jobs there. I'd also like to shout out to our very special sponsors. Our main sponsor is City of Sydney, who without whom Emerge just wouldn't be possible, and our event partner as well, South Everleigh. Thanks again to everyone who logged on and everyone who will watch this video once it's online. Thanks very much and bye.